Maybe you've spent months, even years, collecting new words, convinced that the next list, the next app, the next set of flashcards would finally be the thing that made you sound fluent. And maybe, despite all that effort, conversations still feel harder than they should, still full of small pauses where a word you're sure you know refuses to show up in time. If that sounds familiar, I want you to hear this clearly before we go any further. The problem was never how many words you had. It was something else entirely. And today, we're going to fix that instead. You don't need more vocabulary. I know that sounds strange coming from a channel about learning English, but it's true. And once you understand why, you'll stop wasting energy on the thing most learners think is the problem, and start building the one skill that actually makes people sound fluent, even with a small, ordinary vocabulary. Here's what I mean. You've probably met someone who knows thousands of English words but still sounds stiff and hesitant when they speak. And you've probably also met someone with a fairly small vocabulary who somehow sounds completely natural, relaxed, easy to listen to. The difference between them was never how many words they knew. It was one specific skill. And today, we're going to break that skill into 4 simple parts you can start practicing immediately. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly what fluent speakers are actually doing differently. And you'll have 4 practical ways to build that same skill into your own English, starting with your very next conversation. And I'll tell you now, the third part is the one most learners resist at first, because it feels a little uncomfortable, right up until the moment it becomes the thing that finally makes speaking feel easy, natural, and far less exhausting than constantly hunting for a single perfect word under pressure. This is English Master Path, where we build real speaking confidence through small daily habits, not more grammar rules. Let me ask you something honestly. If I gave you a long, difficult English word right now, and you forgot it completely, mid-sentence, could you still finish your thought? Almost certainly yes. Using simpler words you already know well. Words you've probably used 1,000 times before without a second thought. Here's the truth nobody tells you. That ability, the ability to say the same idea in more than one way, is worth more than another 1,000 words in your vocabulary list. Vocabulary gives you options. This skill is what actually lets you use them, flexibly, under pressure, in real time. Now pause for a moment and think honestly about your own conversations. When a word disappears on you, what usually happens next? Silence, an apology, switching to your first language, or do you already try, even clumsily, to say it another way? There's no wrong answer here. Just notice your honest pattern, because it will tell you exactly how much of this skill you already have and how much we're about to build together. We're going to call this skill flexibility, and we're going to build it across 4 parts: a mindset shift, a simplification move, a description move, and a daily practice that trains all 3 together. None of these 4 parts require a classroom, an app, or a single new flashcard. Every single one of them uses only what you already carry around in your head, right now, today, whether you've noticed it or not. Stay with me, because by the middle of this video, you'll start noticing this exact skill in every fluent speaker you've ever admired, and you'll finally understand what they were actually doing. Part 1 is the mindset shift, and it has to happen before any technique will actually work. Most learners quietly believe that speaking well means finding the one exact, perfect word for every idea. It sounds reasonable. It's also the belief that quietly wrecks fluency more than almost anything else, because it turns every sentence into a search for perfection instead of an attempt at communication. Think of a learner named Lena, who genuinely believed that using a slightly wrong or slightly simple word meant she had failed. So whenever the perfect word didn't arrive instantly, she would stop completely, rather than continue with something close enough. Ironically, her vocabulary was already large. Her real problem wasn't a lack of words. It was a belief that anything less than the exact right one wasn't worth saying at all. Lena later described this belief as carrying an invisible test score into every conversation, as if each sentence were being graded. And any imperfect word lowered the grade enough to make the whole attempt feel pointless. Once she recognized that no one around her was actually grading anything, that people were simply trying to understand her, the pressure behind every missing word started to soften almost immediately. Here's the fix. Before we get into any technique, you need to consciously accept one idea. The goal of a sentence is to be understood, not to be perfect. Say this with me out loud as a kind of small personal agreement. My goal is to be understood, not to be perfect. Say it again. My goal is to be understood, not to be perfect. That sentence isn't just motivation, it's permission. Permission to keep speaking even when the ideal word doesn't show up. You'll know this mindset shift is starting to work when a slightly wrong word doesn't stop your sentence anymore. It just becomes part of it. One mistake to avoid here. Don't confuse this with giving up on improving your English. This isn't about lowering your standards forever. It's about lowering them for one single moment. The moment you're mid-sentence and a word won't come, so the sentence can actually finish. There's an emotional layer underneath this mindset shift that's worth naming directly. For many learners, a missing word doesn't just feel inconvenient, it feels like evidence. Evidence that they're not really fluent, not really capable, not really good enough despite years of effort. That feeling is understandable, but it's built on a false comparison, comparing your real-time spoken English to some imagined flawless version that doesn't actually exist for anyone, in any language. Releasing that comparison, even slightly, tends to free up more fluency than any single vocabulary lesson ever could. Now that we've built the mindset that makes flexibility possible, let's move into the first concrete technique, the simplification move. Part 2 is the simplification move, trading a bigger, more precise word for 2 or 3 smaller ones that get the same idea across. This is often the fastest fix available to you, and it's almost always sitting right there, unused, because most learners have been trained to reach for the impressive word instead of the reliable one. Consider a learner named Omar who, mid-sentence, once forgot the word exhausted completely. Instead of stopping, he simply said, "very tired," and continued the sentence without missing a beat. Nobody in the conversation even noticed a gap. The message arrived exactly the same, even though the word itself was simpler than the one he originally reached for. What surprised Omar most, looking back, wasn't that the simpler phrase worked. It was how long he'd assumed it wouldn't. He had quietly believed that using a simpler word would make him sound less capable, when in reality, the conversation flowed better precisely because he didn't stop to search for something more impressive. The listener cared about the story he was telling, not the sophistication of any single word inside it. Here's the practice. Take a slightly advanced word you sometimes struggle to recall and build a simpler 2 or 3 word version of it, right now. If the word is exhausted, the simple version is very tired. If the word is furious, the simple version is very angry. If the word is exhausted feels too big in the moment, very tired is always available. Try one yourself right now. Pick a word you sometimes forget and build its simple version out loud. This matters because your brain almost always has a simple version available, even when the advanced version disappears under pressure. Practicing this deliberately trains you to reach for that simple version instantly, instead of freezing while searching for the word you originally wanted. If you're not sure how to simplify a word in the moment, a useful trick is to imagine explaining it to a child, not because the listener needs child-level language, but because that mental frame naturally pulls you toward simpler, more common words instead of the more advanced ones you originally reached for. Over time, you won't need the trick at all. The simpler version will simply arrive on its own, right alongside the original word. ready as a backup. We've covered the mindset and the simplification move. Now let's move into the technique most learners avoid at first, even though it might be the most powerful one of all four. Part 3 is the description move. And this is the one I mentioned at the beginning, the one that feels a little uncomfortable at first. Instead of naming a thing directly, you describe it, what it does, what it looks like, what category it belongs to, until the listener understands whether or not the exact word ever arrives. Picture a learner named Priya who once needed the word screwdriver in a hardware store and completely blanked. Instead of stopping, she said, "The tool you use to turn these small metal things into wood," while gesturing at a screw. The store worker understood immediately and handed her exactly what she needed. The word screwdriver never even came up, and the entire interaction still worked perfectly. Here's why so many learners resist this move at first. It feels like admitting defeat, like proof that your English isn't good enough. It's actually the opposite. Describing around a missing word is something every fluent speaker does constantly, in every language, whenever a specific term slips their mind. It's not a sign of weak English. It's a sign of flexible English. One mistake to avoid here: don't over-explain once the listener already understands. A short, clear description is enough. Adding 3 or 4 extra sentences, trying to perfectly justify the missing word, usually creates more confusion than the original gap ever did. Say enough to be understood, and then simply continue the conversation. Let's practice this together right now. Imagine you forget the word calendar. Instead of freezing, you could say, "The thing on the wall that shows all the days of the month." Say that with me. The thing on the wall that shows all the days of the month. Notice, the listener would understand immediately, probably before you even finished the sentence, which is exactly the point of this entire technique. You'll know this move is working when it stops feeling like a failure and starts feeling like a normal part of speaking. The same way native speakers casually say the thing, you know, whatchamacallit, without a hint of embarrassment. Practice describing 3 ordinary objects around you right now, without naming them directly. Just describing what they are or what they do. A learner named Marco found this technique especially useful not just for missing words, but for words he'd genuinely never learned in the first place. Traveling once, he needed to ask about a specific kitchen tool he had no English word for at all. Not forgotten, simply never known. He described it anyway. The thing you use to peel the skin off vegetables, and the shopkeeper immediately understood and handed him a peeler. The technique worked exactly the same whether the word was temporarily missing or had never been learned at all, which meant it was useful in far more situations than most learners initially expect. Now pause for a moment and think about a recent conversation where a word slipped away from you. Could you have simplified it? Could you have described around it? There's no need to feel bad about the answer either way. This is simply the first time you've been asked to notice these options on purpose, rather than reaching for them by accident. Half panicked, in the middle of a real conversation. We've covered the mindset, simplification, and description. Now let's bring all 3 together into the daily practice that actually builds this as a real, usable skill, rather than something you only remember in theory. Part 4 is the daily flexibility drill, and it's simple enough to do in under 2 minutes a day, yet powerful enough to noticeably change how you speak within a few weeks. Each day, pick 1 ordinary word, something you already know well, and say it in 3 different ways: the direct word, a simplified version, and a description. Think of a learner named Julia who practiced this daily with common household words. Take the word umbrella. She'd say the word itself, umbrella. Then a simplified version, the thing for rain. Then a description. You hold it over your head when it's raining outside. 3 different paths to the exact same idea. Practiced daily, until her brain stopped panicking the moment any single path was blocked. Julia noticed something interesting after a few weeks of this small daily habit. She wasn't just getting faster at finding backup words when she forgot something. She was forgetting words less often in the first place, because the calm, low-pressure practice of exploring 3 paths daily seemed to strengthen her memory of the original word too. Almost as a side effect of no longer being afraid to lose it, here's the practice right now with me. Pick the word chair. Say it directly. Chair. Now simplify it. A seat. Now describe it. The thing you sit on. 3 paths. Same idea. That's the entire drill, repeated daily with a new word, until this kind of flexible thinking becomes automatic instead of effortful, the same way a fluent speaker never even notices they're choosing between 3 available paths. They simply speak, smoothly, whichever path happens to be closest at that particular moment. This matters because in a real conversation, you rarely get to choose calmly which path to take. The word either comes, or it doesn't. And if it doesn't, your brain needs an immediate, practiced backup, not a stressful improvisation happening for the very first time under pressure. Practicing all 3 paths daily, deliberately, in a low-stakes moment, is exactly what makes the right backup appear automatically later, when it actually matters. Give this drill about 2 weeks before expecting it to feel automatic. The first few days will feel slow and a little effortful, because you're building a new mental habit, not recalling an old one. That effort is completely normal, and it fades much faster than most learners expect once the pattern starts to stick. If choosing a word each day feels like an extra decision you don't have energy for, keep it simple. Just glance around your room and pick whatever you see first: a lamp, a cup, a shoe. The word itself matters far less than the repetition of practicing all 3 paths, day after day, until the pattern becomes something your brain reaches for automatically, without needing to think about the steps at all. Small steps, real progress. This is where most people stop, right before the part that actually changes things. Don't stop. Before we bring everything together, it's worth naming something honest about all 4 parts of this skill. None of them require learning a single new word. The mindset shift, the simplification move, the description move, and the daily drill are all built entirely from vocabulary you already have. That's exactly why this skill matters more than another vocabulary list ever could. It doesn't wait for you to know more. It makes what you already know dramatically more usable. Think about that for a moment. Somewhere in your existing vocabulary, right now, without adding a single new word, there are probably hundreds of small substitutions and descriptions you've simply never practiced using on purpose. This isn't about discovering new material. It's about finally putting the material you've already collected to work. The way a well-organized toolbox is more useful than a bigger, messier one. Even if the bigger one technically contains more tools. A learner named Yusuf put all 4 parts together over the course of about a month, without trying to master them all at once. He started with the mindset shift alone, just giving himself permission to be imperfect. A week later, he added the simplification move. A week after that, the description move. By the time he added the daily drill, the first 3 had already started feeling less like separate techniques and more like one single, flexible way of speaking. Nothing about his vocabulary had changed. Everything about how usable it felt had. There's also a quiet emotional layer underneath all of this. Many learners feel a kind of shame every time a word disappears, as if it proves something bad about their effort or their intelligence. But once you understand that flexibility, not vocabulary size, is the actual skill being tested in conversation, that shame starts to lose its grip. A missing word stops being evidence of failure and becomes simply the normal, expected moment where this skill gets to do its job. Now let's turn everything we've covered into one simple method you can use starting today. Call it one idea, 3 ways. Whenever you're practicing, or whenever a word genuinely disappears mid-conversation, remind yourself there are always at least 3 paths to the same idea. The direct word if it comes, a simpler substitute if it doesn't, and a short description if neither one shows up in time. You never actually run out of options. You only run out of options if you've never practiced reaching for the other 2. Let's walk through what this actually looks like in a real moment. Imagine you're mid-sentence, describing your weekend, and the word exhausted disappears completely. The old pattern would be a long, awkward silence or a nervous apology. The new pattern looks different. You reach first for the direct word, and if it's not there, you drop immediately into the simplified version, very tired, and keep going, without announcing the gap at all. The listener never experiences a failure. They just hear a slightly simpler sentence, delivered smoothly and with confidence. Let's try a second scenario, because this method becomes far more natural once you've practiced it in more than one situation. Imagine you're at a pharmacy, and the word bandage completely disappears from your mind. Instead of stopping, you move straight into the description path, the small, sticky thing you put on a cut. The pharmacist understands immediately, hands you exactly what you need, and the conversation continues as if nothing was ever missing at all. In both scenarios, a word disappeared, and in both scenarios, it simply didn't matter, because you already had 2 more paths waiting. You don't need to master all 4 parts perfectly before your next conversation. Start with whichever one felt the most useful while you were watching this, and practice only that one for the next few days. Then add a second. This isn't about becoming flawless overnight. It's about giving your brain more than one road to the same destination. Let that sentence land before you move on. Here's what we covered today. The mindset shift, releasing the belief that only the perfect word counts. The simplification move, trading a big word for 2 or 3 small ones. The description move, explaining around a missing word instead of freezing. And the daily flexibility drill, practicing all 3 paths deliberately, so they're ready before you actually need them. Each of these 4 parts solves a slightly different moment. The mindset shift changes how you feel the instant a word disappears. Calmer, less panicked, less ashamed. The simplification move gives you a fast, almost automatic backup for common words. The description move gives you a reliable option even for words you barely know or never learned at all. And the daily drill quietly builds all 3 into a single, reflexive habit, so that in a real conversation, you're not choosing between them consciously, you're simply flowing toward whichever one is available in that moment, the way a fluent speaker does, without ever stopping to think about which technique they're technically using. Fluency was never really about how many words you've collected. It's about how many ways you can reach the same idea when one path closes. Vocabulary gives you the raw material. Flexibility is what actually turns that material into speech, especially in the exact moments when speaking feels hardest, mid-sentence, under pressure, with someone waiting for an answer. Notice something about all 4 parts of this skill. Not one of them asked you to sit down and memorize anything new. The mindset shift asked you to release a belief. The simplification move asked you to reach for words you already own. The description move asked you to explain instead of name. And the daily drill asked you to repeat a pattern using material you already had sitting in your memory, unused. That's the quiet difference between chasing more vocabulary and building real flexibility. And almost every learner who feels stuck has been chasing the wrong one for years without realizing it, spending hours on new lists while the actual skill that would have helped them sat completely unpracticed the entire time. If you've spent years collecting new words, hoping that the next list, the next 1,000 words, would finally be the thing that made you sound fluent, consider a different possibility. The words you already have were probably always enough for far more conversations than you gave them credit for. What was missing wasn't more raw material. It was the skill of using what you already had, flexibly, confidently, Even when the one perfect word refused to show up on time, there's a small, quiet kind of relief in that realization, if you let yourself feel it. It means you're not starting from zero. It means every word you've ever learned, even the ones that occasionally slip away under pressure, is still valuable, still usable, still part of a working system, as long as you know how to reach it from more than one direction. Think about how this plays out over months, not just in a single conversation. Every time you use the mindset shift instead of freezing, every time you simplify instead of stopping, every time you describe instead of apologizing, you're not just getting through one sentence more smoothly. You're quietly proving to yourself, again and again, that a missing word was never actually a wall. It was only ever a small detour, one your existing vocabulary was already fully equipped to handle. Over enough repetitions, that proof becomes a new kind of confidence, one that doesn't depend on knowing every word in advance, but on trusting your own ability to work with whatever words happen to be available in the moment. Tonight, try the one idea, 3 ways drill with a single word before you go to sleep. Just once, to feel how it works, and notice how much less effort it takes than you expected once you actually try it, instead of only imagining it in theory. Tell me in the comments, which of these 4 parts do you think will help you the most? The mindset shift, the simplification move, the description move, or the daily flexibility drill? And if you've ever caught yourself avoiding a whole conversation just because you were worried about not finding the perfect word, tell me that too, because you're far from the only one. And that pattern is exactly what this video was built to interrupt. If this helped you see your own English a little differently, subscribe to English Master Path. We build real speaking confidence here, one honest, doable habit at a time, using the words you already have, not just the ones you haven't learned yet. And if you only take one thing from today, let it be this. The next time you're searching for a course, a list, or an app promising to give you more words, ask yourself honestly whether more words are really what's missing, or whether it's simply permission and a little practice to use the words already sitting quietly in your memory, waiting for more than one way to be reached. That fear you feel when the perfect word won't come, it's normal. It's not proof that your English isn't good enough, and it never was, no matter how many times it's felt that way in the past. Small steps, real progress. And the next time a word disappears mid-sentence, you'll already know you have 2 more paths waiting, ready, right where you left them.